Y'all remember the question of the day? What are you doing here? Think about this question for a moment, and I'm going to ask it again in those three ways. What are you doing here? What is it about this place, about this congregation, about this building, about this group of people, about these friends, this family? Why are you here? Now, think about it this way. Why are you here? We all have this backstory. It's part of our lives, shaped us, created us to who we are today. Why are you here? And the next, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What drives us forward? What moves us? So, I want to think about those questions, but I want to probe them through the story of Elijah that you all heard earlier. There he is, some depiction of him. Let's start with the question of his backstory. What are you doing here, Elijah? That's the question that's posed twice in the scripture. We have this amazing story about Elijah encountering God. But before we get to today's scripture, I want to just briefly go over a little bit of Elijah's backstory, because he's one of those people who has big events in his life, big experiences that shaped him to be who he was, and his goes a little like this. King Ahab, one of the kings in the book of Kings, is ruling Israel and doing his very best, King Ahab is, to strengthen economic and political ties with the surrounding nations. Of course, one of the best ways to do this is to marry the daughter of a neighboring king. So Ahab marries Jezebel, the daughter of the Phoenician king. He wants to build power. He wants to stabilize foreign relations. So if you have a hard time, that's not how politics work these days, but if you have a hard time wrapping your head around this, just think of it like when Karen and I got married, right? I was from Phoenix. I was a Phoenician. She was from Annville. She was from Lebanon County. She was Lebanese. So we brought together the Phoenicians and the Lebanese. It's pretty much just like that in this Bible story. You didn't know we had such Middle Eastern roots, did you? Here's where it goes a little unlike me and Karen, though. The new queen brought an entirely different religion and God to that relationship. Actually, that in and of itself wasn't all that radical. King Solomon's wives did the same. In fact, King Solomon often, as kind of a wedding gift to his many, many wives, he would build a little monument to their deity as just a way to say, welcome to the family. But Jezebel, she wanted to go a little bit further. Well, she wanted to go a lot further. She wanted to make the worship of her god, Baal Melquart, she wanted to make Baal Melquart the official god. And this sparked a holy war. Elijah, the prophet of the God, Yahweh, was horrified. And he told people all about it. Couldn't accept another god. We can't do that. That would be straying from the ways of God. So he goes to King Ahab and he demands that Ahab return to Yahweh. But Ahab sticks with his new bride. From there, famine strikes the land, and of course, everybody thinks Elijah's at stake. He's branded an enemy of the state. And that's when Ahab and Elijah agree to this duel. And I think a lot of you have probably heard this story, right? It's a sacrifice off, if you will. If Elijah can get Yahweh to spontaneously light a sacrifice, he wins. However, if the prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, can do the same and light that sacrifice, they will win. So, the story's maybe a little predictable. Elijah's sacrifice is sparked, Baal's fails, and to the victor go the spoils. The spoils, in this case, they're playing for high stakes, execution. And so Elijah executes all 450 of these prophets. It's downright brutal. And this is where our scripture for today picks up. Oh, I forgot to do that fun little part. From 1 Kings chapter 19. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, killing the prophets, how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more so also, if I do not make your life like one of them by this time tomorrow." Then Elijah, was afraid. He got up and fled for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Elijah's triumph quickly turned to terror as Jezebel, hearing what had happened to her prophets, tells Elijah, "That's nothing compared to what I'm going to do to you." And so Elijah heads for the hills. And it's here that he has and sees no future for himself or his people. He totally breaks down. He asks God to end his life. Now, we can probably imagine that he's exhausted, he's scared, he's terrified, and you even get the impression that he's pretty depressed as he sits down under this broom tree and he begs God to take his life. So what are you doing here? Like I said, we all have a backstory. And sometimes we felt like it's been as bad as Elijah's, when all we want to do is lay down and fade away, sink into the sofa. Often, it's of our own doing. We've made poor choices, and now we got to live with the consequences. Some other times, we might just get the short end of the stick. Bad luck. Maybe we've made all the right moves and things still didn't work out. And we want to fade away. No matter how it happens, it happens. Times when we see no good way forward. Meaning is drained. And we think, what am I doing here? Times like that, we just want to sit under a broom tree and we want to go to sleep. Has anybody ever felt that way besides me? I got to wondering, why a broom tree? It's a clue when we read Scripture and we see something that's very specific in there. It's not just a tree, it's a broom tree. That's often a clue for us that we need to dig a little deeper. Now, so I dug a little deeper, and what I saw was this. Broom trees were and are often used for kindling and for firewood. Their embers burn slowly. And so sometimes what a traveler would do is they would make a fire with the broom tree, and they would get the embers, and then they would dig a shallow ditch. They'd put the embers in there, and then they would put soil or sand back on top, and when it got a little cool that night, they had a nice warm bed to sleep in. Pre-electric blanket days. The broom tree was a place of renewal. It was a place where you could seek shelter from the sun, a place where you could be warmed at night, and then in the morning you could dig up those embers and not have to start the fire all over again. And so now the question shifts. What are you doing here? Is this a place of renewal for you? This congregation? These people, these neighbors, these friends, this family, this building? Is this our broom tree? Let's continue with the scripture. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up, ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. And at that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. The word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out, stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." I like how the voice of God is kind of like a snooze alarm there. Comes and taps him once, "Get up and eat." He was so down in the dumps, he didn't do it. And again, that reminder, get up and eat. You need your strength. You need to carry on. And really, the time for wallowing has ended. It's time to get up and get moving. And we have this question. What are you doing here, Elijah? Now, I like Elijah's response in some ways. It's interesting. He launches into this full-on defense/complaint. I'm not sure which or if it's both. God, I did what was right. Even when the rest of the nation was turning away from you, I stuck to it. I was faithful. And what did I get in return? I'm a refugee, a wanted man. They want to kill me. They're going to catch me and kill me. And this voice of the Lord's response to Elijah doesn't give any reassurance, but rather this: go listen for God. Now there's a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. This is often translated as God's still small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Second time. He answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they're seeking my life to take it away." And that's this scene here. I wonder how Elijah heard the emphasis in that sentence. What are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here, Elijah? Maybe God was expecting someone else? Or what are you doing here, Elijah? Or was it, what are you doing here? I think it probably could have been any of those, and you could make an argument for each. But what comes next inclines me to think it was the last. What are you doing here? Because this is where Elijah gets his marching orders. Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill. Whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. Like I said a little earlier, this sermon sprang out of some conversations that we've been having among the pastoral team. We've been having them for months, maybe even years. And we talk about them on the church board, at the church board to some degree. Because we always want to be asking ourselves, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What are we doing? What are we doing here? I don't know about you, but how we ask that question makes all the difference in the world, and different ways can apply at different times. I wonder what we think we're doing here. What do you think we're doing here? I met with David Steele. He's the General Secretary for the Church of the Brethren. I met with him a couple of weeks ago. And it was an interesting conversation with him. We talked and we shared some of what was going on in our respective ministries. And he said this. He said, I don't know what y'all are doing in Elizabethtown, but keep it up. The story that you are living as a congregation has been inspiration for us around the denomination. And I'm not talking about exactly what our message has been. What he was talking about is the vibrancy that is found in this congregation. What he was talking about was the ways in which we are doing what we do, and doing so unapologetically in the way that we have understood Jesus calling us. I got another story for you. I was talking with somebody who's part of this congregation, somebody who's been struggling under the broom tree of life, so to speak. And she said, you know what, Pastor Greg, I don't know how I would have made it through this last year if not for this congregation. I literally don't know how I would have gone on, how I would have lived my life. We're a community that lives that reckless love that Pastor Pam pointed to earlier when we sang that song. We're a congregation that lives as an example. We're a congregation that loves others both at the very interpersonal level, but also at the macro level in everything we do. And that's put us in a place where we have a very unique opportunity. Where we have an opportunity where I wonder what people in 50 or 100 years are going to say about what that crazy Church of the Brethren, E-Town Church of the Brethren, was doing back in the 2010s and 2020s. We have a very unique opportunity in all of who we are in congregational living. I wonder what would happen if we really believed that and lived into it. What are we doing here?